Both of our assets are aimed to do one thing, which is to replace the imports that the U.S. is reliant upon China. As of February 4th, China put a ban, and it's not a surprise that they put a ban on tungsten concentrate, but then also military-grade tungsten products. If you look at that macro trend, you can see that China has taken more of a defensive stance on products that are used in military applications. So what we've done by adding the Tenpaiyu project is we've allowed some diversification. We've also enhanced our ability to provide more product into the United States.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're privileged to have a supporting sponsor of Liberty and Finance here today. It's a company that we've introduced to you recently, and we're talking to a new representative of the company. J.T. Starzecki is the executive chairman of Guardian Metal Resources. We're recording this today is Thursday, August 21st, 2025. JT, thank you for coming on this first time on Liberty and Finance.
Donegan, thanks for having me. Looking forward to today's conversation.
Our audience and subscribers have met Oliver Friesen, the CEO of Guardian Metal Resources, and he recommended that we should have you with our audience to help fill in some more details that would help them understand why, for one thing, Rick Rule elected Guardian Metal Resources to be one of the companies attending the Rule Symposium on Natural Resource Investing in Boca Raton, Florida, where we met with your company recently and did our first interview there with Oliver about it. It's also a good chance to fill in some details on the remarkable and singular award by the U.S. government, Department of Defense recently, and why tungsten, one of the metals that you focus on, is such a strategic and critical material, and securing domestic supply of that for the U.S. is so important at this time. And then some really new and exciting information that you can share about shareholder financing that's been able to bolster the balance sheet of the company in the wake of that government award, and the additional resource that you've been able to acquire to help de-risk the volume of material you'll be able to provide once production kicks in. So for all those topics, thank you for joining us. And I guess if you could first kick us off with that first one, is recapping in your understanding why Guardian Metal Resources stood out in the government's assessment of the company to receive the recent DoD award for a tungsten producer.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take the audience through the evolution of that program and that process. So we actually started to engage with the Department of Defense. It was probably about two and a half years ago. So you first start to engage, you start to educate different departments on the value of the material, of the project, the validity and the viability and the scale at which you could produce said material. So we then at one point, probably a year and a half to 2 years ago, we entered in an official submission to the Department of Defense under the DPA Title III Ukraine Supplement Program. And through that particular process, they evaluated a few different elements that went into, ultimately a recommendation. And as you rightfully pointed out, about 3 weeks ago, we received the official award from the Department of Defense. And one of those things was sort of where you are in the life cycle of developing a mining and exploration project. And so since we started that process 2.5 years ago, it certainly gave us a first mover advantage. So when you kind of look at how viable a project is, you have to look at the economics. You have to look at how valuable and what applications the material is utilized in. You have to look at time to production. You have to look at sort of the capital cost and is it feasible? And because we started the project or process a couple of years ago, we were able to sort of get the Department of Defense to understand how vital a product like tungsten is. We rightfully pointed out the fact that the U.S. actually hasn't had domestic tungsten production for the last dozen years. And then certainly our case was helped, when germanium and gallium had import restrictions put on it. Prior to that, you had import restrictions on antimony. And then February 4th of this year, China announced official import ban or an export ban to the United States for all tungsten and tungsten-related materials. So you put all of that together, you look at the validity and the opportunity and the tonnages that we can add from our project. You look at the fact that we're in a very mining-friendly jurisdiction in the state of Nevada. We are solely focused on tungsten, and really all of the stars aligned, and it made us a very credible and valid opportunity for the U.S. government to invest in. And so a lot of time and effort went into it, and ultimately we were rewarded with a Department of Defense award, which anybody that has been involved in that process knows that it takes more than just a little bit of marketing and a little bit of, sort of dust sprinkled on things. You really have to have a lot of substance behind it. And what we were able to show with Pilot Mountain is that not only were we going to be able to produce and provide tungsten domestically, but we're also rehabbing a brownfield site, which also is looked on favorably in today's mining, ecosystem. So it's been a great culmination. It really is the stamp of approval that the U.S. government got behind our project, and we're very excited about where we're going to take Pilot Mountain.
The principles that you just enumerated are so critical. This idea of the revelation that really happened across so many global supply chains over the past 4 years, starting with global supply chain lockdowns and fragmentation and port closures and container ships stacking up outside of major shipping ports, and frankly, sanctions between countries saying, well, as did happen here with China, we're not going to export this critical material to the U.S. anymore. Those kind of aha moments, those wake-up calls to each country that they need to have a domestic supply of critical and strategic materials is not just limited to tungsten. There are any number of different examples of that the U.S. seems to be in the middle of trying to scramble and lock down reliable supplies that are not dependent on traditional adversaries to be able to fulfill, and to now allow the sovereignty and the freedom of our country despite changing geopolitical winds and financial pressures. This is a good example. You mentioned a twofold nature of the resources you have. Can you talk about the jurisdiction that they're in Nevada, why that's particularly favorable, but the difference between the two major resources, one of which was actually added after receiving the DoD award?
So let me clarify one thing. So we actually acquired the Tempaiute project at the beginning of this year. So technically that project came into our portfolio sort of around the January timeframe. But as you rightfully point out, we've now built our business case around the fact that we've got multiple assets in a very mining-friendly jurisdiction. So when you get into the geology of it, actually, both of the deposits sit within the Walker Lane belt in Nevada, which, from a permitting perspective is a pretty straightforward, very non-controversial state. Like if you get outside of Reno and you get outside of Las Vegas, it is mining communities everywhere else that you look. And so we have both of the assets that are now in our portfolio. Both were historic producing mines. So we know the geology, we know the deposit, we know the yields. And so we've now upgraded the resource, or we are working on a PFS statement for Pilot Mountain. We finished a year-long drilling campaign where we were able to drop a bunch of holes. The intention then is to provide an upgraded resource schedule as part of the PFS. But as you write,
let me give a little insertion there. It reminds me when we used to watch the Mythbusters show, they would say caution, technical content ahead. So PFS, is that a pre-feasibility study?
It is a pre-feasibility study.
Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So we're working through the PFS project, which is what ultimately the Department of Defense award was for. And we're about to launch a drilling campaign on the second asset, Tempaiute. And it kind of goes back to one of your opening statements, which is off the back of the DoD award, we were able to go into the equity markets and garner further support from existing shareholders to provide us a necessary capital to then look at this second project. And what's interesting about the Tempaiute project is there's existing infrastructure that we acquired as part of the project. So there's a power station, there's a water pipeline, there's a mill facility, there's an office complex that would need some refurbishment. But both of our assets are aimed to do one thing, which is to replace the imports that the U.S. is reliant upon China. So the United States currently imports about 11 to 12,000 tons of tungsten annually, and about 4,000 of that, give or take, comes directly from China. As of February 4th, China put a ban, and it's not a surprise that they put a ban on tungsten concentrate, but then also military-grade tungsten products. It also probably isn't coincidence that when you look at antimony and the ban they put on antimony, antimony and tungsten have deep military applications, munitions, armor defense, armor munitions. So, if you look at that macro trend, you can see that China has taken more of a defensive stance on products that are used in military applications. So what we've done by adding the Tenpaiyu project is we've allowed some diversification. We've also, enhanced our ability to provide more product into the United States. And different from some of the other critical minerals that are also in the news, like rare earths specifically, the U.S. has had a long history of the actual production and refinement of tungsten concentrate into other derivative products. So unlike rare earths, we don't lack the ability to process. What we do lack here in the United States is the actual mined source. And that's where Guardian Metal comes into play. So, when you look at a true domestic defense mineral story, it starts and goes through Guardian Metals, given the fact that we've got world-class assets that are produced in the past. We're working on upgrading and moving the projects along. And then we also have a letter of intent, sort of distribution agreement with Global Tungsten and Powders, which is located in Towanda, Pennsylvania. So when you look at sort of mining, processing, and then ultimately the ability to service the U.S. sector when it comes to tungsten, that conversation starts and ends with Guardian Metals.
It's a compelling story, and one that was not lost on your early investors to whom you went back for additional financing in order to be able to acquire the secondary resource. Can you talk to us about how that played out?
Yeah, so as you rightfully point out, we've had some shareholders that have been with us and are still with us since the IPO little over 2.5 years ago, or about 2.5 years ago. We have a lot of shareholders that not only have they continued to follow their money, but we recently, within the 2025 calendar year, had a group step in that did a private placement deal with an existing shareholder. So for anybody that hasn't really looked into the Guardian Metal story, we were actually spun out of the Rip Rule incubation company, Power Metals, which is a London listed incubation and mining organization. We then spun out, and really that model is to then have the companies operate independently with the hopes of them listing independently and then them being able to monetize their position, of which Power Metal has done very successfully. There was a news release that came out recently that ultimately their stake in Guardian Metal has allowed them to take that sort of profit, if you will, and then reinvest it back into other projects. So we had a group come in out of the UK that took a heavy stake initially, and then actually was the foundation of this last $21 million fundraise. So we've had a really good sort of tight, concise shareholder base, continue to be supportive, have continued to follow their money, and in some cases have increased their stake in the organization because they see the value in what we're doing. They see the opportunity for tungsten, and we have a lot of tailwinds behind us, right? So right time, right place, right assets. It has really sort of brought us to where we are today, which is in an absolutely fantastic position.
It's interesting the way you describe that. It sounds like this, what I view and what Rick has taught me to try to look for and taught our audience to try to look for, and that's the idea of this win-win-win, where the United States wins because they get a secure domestic supplier of a critical resource. Your company wins because you're able to get that backing and that immediate offtake of future production that's going to be needed domestically. Your shareholders win because the market's going to reward them typically as you move forward through the various stages from exploration and development into production phase. And here, other investors, such as institutional investors, through Power Metal Resources, and that incubator is going to benefit other companies as well. So it's a story that has a lot of winners associated with it. One of the things that, if you could help us to understand, and it seems remarkable, you did mention this, is it's not like there's a lot of mystery left or a lot of risk left in finding out where the material is going to be needed and used. And for further processing, once you start mining it, the fact that you have a domestic production and refinement capabilities right here in the U.S. Ready to go, sounds like it's a market ready-made for you to deliver into.
Well, Donegan, you summed it up perfectly. And I think yet another tailwind that has helped is the fact that the tungsten price in 2025 has almost hockey sticked. So we're actually now at historic highs. One of the things that we did as a board of directors is you always have to baseline projects that you decide you want to put effort and go raise funds for. You have to ensure that the project itself stands on historic prices. So we wouldn't have went down this route originally 2.5, 3 years ago if our project economically didn't stack up against current market price. And the tungsten price historically has been pretty sort of steady eddy. I mean, it hasn't fluctuated a lot. And so when you can bring a project to the market that provides a domestic source, that de-risks your dependency upon a country like China, stacks up economically, and then you throw in the fact that the tailwinds, not only from a domestic mining perspective, get behind you, but then also, a nice cherry on top is the fact that the tungsten price has now currently reached an all-time high. So, the tailwinds are very much in our favor, which means we are working as fast as we possibly can. So the equity infusion that we just took down plays an important role in us advancing both projects. It allowed us to, fast track some of the exploration and the resource upgrade on Tempayu. It's also allowing us to look at things like, how do we put down payments on long lead items? We firmly believe, and we are on record as saying that we believe that these assets can come to production before the current administration leaves office, right? And so we have a big thank you to the current administration for things like permitting reform, fast tracking of projects, and actually getting behind these projects with funding.
One more winner that I forgot to mention, and that is the domestic partner that you're anticipating for the offtake and refining of your material in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of a handful of states in the East that has been hit very hard over the last several decades with offshoring of our steel industry, coal, and so on to other countries, most notably China. Can you talk to us about how this can also be a win for that region with the re-enlivening of that industry in being able to have your steady and reliable supply of high volume of this critical material?
So it's interesting, right? As you rightfully point out, long-time coal mining tradition in Pennsylvania. One of the things that we really haven't spent any time talking about, and I focus specifically on defense given our relationship with the Department of Defense, but when you look at other applications for tungsten, you do get into things like other exploration tools. You definitely get into things like, so the cutting tools that are used in oil and gas are the same cutting tools, given tungsten's, the tensile strength of the product and being one of the densest metals on the periodic table. You can then draw a very clear path into the renewable energy space. So the bits that are needed to cut wind turbine blades, right? So all of a sudden you've got a critical mineral that is going into a historical, met coal or a thermal coal producing state, and then allows them to tap into that mining culture that it runs so deep in the heart of Pennsylvania, but yet you're doing it with a mineral that goes into other areas. It has pharma and defense applications. We have a sponsored study that is in the public domain that we worked with the University of Oxford for tungsten application in nuclear fusion. Right. And so anybody that sort of takes a look at the amount of tungsten that is being used just in the fusion case alone, you can see the supply and demand gaps starting to widen pretty dramatically. And so not only can you use tungsten in current applications, but then all these future-facing pharma and energy applications, that's going to allow states like Pennsylvania to utilize their knowledge and their experience in the exploration space, but apply it in new ways. And so GTP has been a fantastic commercial partner. You will probably start to see some joint media efforts that we'll be doing with GTP and potentially their parent company, because they do look at this as an opportunity to expand and sort of revitalize that particular area of the United States. So it's exciting.
This interesting concept. The irony is not lost on our viewers, where for the past administration, there was a desire to make progress in renewable energy economy, and yet there was a disdain in many cases for this not in my backyard philosophy. And Rick Rule and others have said, look, folks, everything we use in this world either needs to be mined or grown. It doesn't just pop out of thin air. It doesn't come out of a think tank. In the real world where we live, we have to either dig it out of Mother Earth or grow it from Mother Earth. So in this case, there's a plethora of different industries. You mentioned several of them that will be supported and have their needs met domestically. If we're talking about made in USA, being able to support those industries domestically, they're going to need a source of this critical material. You have a timeline for desired progress towards production within the lifetime of the current administration. Any particular next steps that potential investors should anticipate along that pathway to production?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to speak in terms of the company updates. So we have, as we mentioned, we've got two projects. We've got Pilot Mountain and we've got Tempaiute. We are starting a drilling campaign at Tempaiute. So anybody that is interested in the Guardian Metals story, you should look for news flow around that program itself. We'll be releasing drill results. We'll be talking, to the media about the grades and the opportunity that exists. We'll be providing updates on our PFS and at least our engagement with the DoD. I would also look for further commercial updates. GTP is a great story, but they're also not the only processor. So, you've got Buffalo Tungsten. You've got a group actually in Nevada called Kennametals that has a plant that takes tungsten concentrate, but is relatively idle in its throughput. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to partner, with other tungsten processing organizations. There's opportunities for us to partner with what we call the industrial base, so defense sector. So the likes of a Raytheon, a Baker Hughes. You go into exploration with the likes of Schlumberger. You go into, General Dynamics and some of these other industrial and defense contractors. There's a lot of opportunity when it comes to commercial outlets there. We've already publicly talked to the market about delivering the PFS in the first half of 2026. I think that'll really put a stamp of approval on everything we're doing. And of course, we're always looking to further our engagement with the U.S. government. So it doesn't just start and stop with the Department of Defense. In fact, recently, the Department of Energy has sort of pivoted and have taken sort of everything that happened under the last administration and gone back to its exploration roots. But they've just identified and earmarked $1 billion for critical minerals projects here in the United States. So that, again, opens up another opportunity for us at Guardian Metals to sort of partner with the U.S. government and say, look, we've got the opportunity to fast track 2 projects. We've got the opportunity to bring these projects into production under the current administration. And if the U.S. government provides us commercial support, continues to provide us funding support, there is nothing between us but air and opportunity. And we are going to run and are running as hard as we possibly can to get these assets to be in a position where we can provide the U.S. market with tungsten.
Yeah, that's a light bulb that went on for me just in this conversation, was the flourishing effect about Made in USA, trying to reinvigorate the United States' industrial base, is that there are so many aspects of that these critical materials, such as tungsten, are uniquely required to be able to do. And when we have an interruption, who knows how long it'll be from foreign suppliers, having a reliable domestic supply that has partnerships with all of these other industries in the U.S. can really be an enabler to support the employment and the technology development and everything that's needed for progress in a host of other industries. So this is a potentially very exciting story for potential investors. Our audience has been educated, as I have for the last 10 years plus, by Rick Rule about what to look for in a company before the crowds recognize that. Certainly your award from the DoD is going to get some public attention, and that's expected as you move through the gates of the pre-feasibility study and on towards production is probably going to garner additional public attention. So for those who are interested in being early movers into a company that was already an early mover for the last 4 years, where should they go to get more insights into Guardian Metal Resources and whether they might want to become potential investors?
So I think we do a fantastic job in trying to push out our news flow and our information through social media channels. So we push a lot of content through LinkedIn. We push a lot of content through X. We push a lot of content out to our website. So anybody that wants to go out and take a look at our current investor presentation and sort of have a look into sort of the inner workings of both projects, they should go to guardianmetalresources.com. And have a look there. We have a very open policy when it comes to prospective investors and current investors, where if you're interested and you want to have a dialogue with myself as executive chairman, and certainly with our chief executive officer, Oliver Friesen, he and I are always very willing to talk to anybody that wants to learn more about tungsten, wants to learn more about the market, applications, and certainly the investment proposition we think is very, very enticing. So, reach out to us. You can reach out to us via the website or via social media, and we'd be happy to have conversations. But yeah, that's where I would start. And then there is a bevy of items that are out there that cover not only on the tungsten market, we've got some sell-side research coverage that is out there too as well in the public domain. So there's a lot of opportunity to educate, prospective investors on tungsten, and we are always very, very amenable and happy to talk to any either current investor or prospective investors about the upside to Guardian Metals.
And folks, as always, if you look in the description of this video, you will find information not only on the company's website for Guardian Metal Resources, but also on their stock ticker. And those are good places to get started to find more information. And we're just grateful, JT Starzecki, Executive Chairman of Guardian Metal Resources, for joining us this first time on Liberty and Finance.
Donegan, thanks for having me. What a great opportunity to talk to your audience. We had just a fantastic story, and really, really enjoyed the opportunity to speak with you today.